Hello, everyone. Welcome to this event with Kern and Ganzeer in conversation about the Free People's Village. My name is Laura Hughes. I'm one of the co-owners of Basket Books and Art. We're based here in Houston, Texas, in the Montrose neighborhood. We opened last June 2022. We're a small independent bookstore and art exhibition space, aiming to serve the various arts communities in Houston, including the literary arts, performing arts, and visual arts. So Kern is a Gulf Coast author and an environmental journalist. Their debut horror novella, Depart, was selected for the honor list for the 2020 Otherwise Award, and their short story collection, Real Sugar is Hard to Find, was hailed in a starred review by Publishers Weekly as, quote, a searing, urgent, but still achingly tender work that will wow any reader of speculative fiction. Ganzeer is the cover artist for Free People's Village and operates seamlessly between art, design, and storytelling, creating what he has coined concept pop. With over 40 exhibitions to his name, Ganzeer's work has been seen in a wide variety of art galleries, impromptu spaces, alleyways, and major museums around the world, such as the Brooklyn Museum in New York, the Palace of the Arts in Cairo, the Greek State Museum in Thessaloniki, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and the Edith Rose House in Oldenburg. Ganzeer's current projects include a short story collection titled Times New Human and a sci-fi graphic novel titled The Solar Grid, which you can see behind me. It comes in 7 volumes, and this is volume 2 right here, as well as most recently The Cursive Eye in 2 volumes, which we have here as well. So what I'd love to know first, since we have you both here together, I really want to ask how this collaboration came about. How did you two connect? How did Ganzeer's work kind of seem to be the right vision for communicating right on the face of it, the story and the main themes of this book. And then if you could talk also about how it came to be, not just the cover jacket, but also the cover design, the end papers, as well as, of course, the fact that the cover unfolds into this incredible poster that so it's a kind of it's ephemera and a kind of a traditional component of publishing. So I'd just love to hear how that all came to be, both materially and kind of the two of you together.
Well, so I actually remember you from 2011 from seeing your art on like stories, because I was involved with Occupy Houston, which was going on at the same time as the Egyptian Revolution. And like there were all these, news stories and stuff coming out of Egypt. And I remember like years later when I found you, I remembered like seeing your art, in the background of headlines about what was going on with the Arab Spring and during the Egyptian Revolution. So I was then at the launch of my first book, Depart, I was putting together, like, we were doing like a fundraiser for Hurricane Laura, and I was putting together like a collection of art by Houston artists who were doing stuff around like climate change as like part of a raffle for this fundraiser thing. And so someone was like, oh, you totally should contact Ganzeer. And then when I started looking at your art, I was like, oh my God, wait, I remember this guy. Like, I remember these images. I can't believe that he's in Houston now. So we connected over that, and I got a print from you that was like included in that raffle.
And it was a solar grid related.
And it was solar grid related print. And then I shortly thereafter like picked up a copy of the Solar Grid, your comic, and I was like, this is so cool. Like, because it's in a similar genre as what I'm writing. And so then it was actually on my, I had 2 books come out in between that and this book. And both times the publisher asked me, like, do you have any input on artists you'd like to have or what you'd like to see for the cover? And I was like, I really love a cover by Ganzeer because I just really liked his art style, and he's local, and I just thought it'd be really cool. And they both said no. But then,
understandably so.
But then, I don't think they could afford you. But then on the Free People's Village, I told my editor, Randy Vasquez, was this artist, listen, this is really perfect for this book. The whole time I was actually writing this book, I was like, man, I really hope Ganzeer can do the cover for this, because the street art, the punk rock elements of it, I just knew his style would be so perfect of a match. And then luckily they went for it.
They did.
So that was great.
I'm actually surprised they went for all the things, because I asked for I want to do the pull-out poster, the dust jacket that becomes a poster, and this thing that's like an album cover on the cover wrap, and also the end papers are maps, and they're printed, whatever. But that came obviously later. But even before that, it was still would be an elaborate. It was an elaborate design as well. So it's kind of all out on all fronts, and I figured they're gonna say no on one or two of those things. So I better ask for all the things.
Yeah.
And then they said yes to all the things.
Yeah.
And I was like, yes, awesome, And then I'm surprised I was able to get it.
It was pretty audacious. We had a really cool meeting. It was me and you and Renee, the editor, and then Jonathan Yamakami did the interior design of the book, so fonts and layout and everything. And we were just, talking about vision for the book and what might be possible. So we were throwing out ideas of scenes and images from the book that would work well. And then you brought up I wanted to connect it to this street art history, and we were looking at the Paris
68 posters.
Paris 68 protest posters. And then a week or something after that meeting, or maybe it was even a couple days after this meeting, he sends us a video of him, and you'd already made a mock-up of look, here's how the cover is going to pull off, and it's going to unfold, and just follow, trust me on this.
I mean, it was basically exactly what you have, but it's just a white piece of sheet of paper with just a sketched out, design, whatever,
and
super rough. But
when I watched the video, I was like, oh my God, that's so cool, but there's no way they're going to go for it. I know publishing, they're not going to go for it. But then, they did. They said yes to everything. So.
I mean, it all came at the time when I first came up with the initial idea, without getting into the details of what actually went into the specifics of the design, but just the idea of that the dust jacket would be a pull-out poster or protest poster, and the cover up would be the album cover. It was just entirely based on your synopsis for the book. I hadn't read the text yet, and you kind of described, and so the first ideas that came to mind based on your description was okay, so the protagonists are a band, which just work in the band aspect of it, so album cover, and then also the protest aspect as well.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where it came about. Oh, well, the cover art could be the protest poster associated with the protest movement that's depicted in the novel, and then the cover art would be the album cover protagonist, right? And then it was only later when I read the manuscript that I was able to kind of get a better grasp of maybe what the characters, kind of what their vibes are, what they look like, and all that stuff, the details.
And I really appreciate you reading it. I don't think 99% of cover artists do not read the books that they make. The art for.
I mean, I get it, because a dedicated cover artist who's that's their thing.
They're not getting paid. They're not getting paid for it.
Yeah, they have to design 30 covers a month or some crazy thing, and I designed this. Maybe it took me 2 months to design the whole thing, so it's just not realistic.
Well, I'm very honored, very lucky, and very honored.
It's a real testament to the world that is built in the novel too. I think it's with the map that is the in papers. It really kind of evokes a lot of science fiction or fantasy or speculative fiction world building and world making. Is that something that you could talk about, Sim, about the kind of legacy of speculative fiction, I mean, Ganzeer as well in your work, how that kind of informs both like the artistic side of what you do, as well as the kind of the social justice and activist component of your work. How like imagining futures and the history of speculative fiction could create sort of a powerful movement out of fiction.
Yeah, man. So I just read Ganzeer's newest zines today. I should talk about my own book. I should talk about your book. But yeah, there was just so many themes in there about like, and I mean, I think in my book too, just thinking about just the ability to both criticize the present and imagine different futures. And I think something we're both preoccupied with is like both of these books deal with like a little bit of revolution is not enough. You know, a little bit of progress is not enough. And like that was the deal with you in Egypt. It was like we got a little bit of revolution, it was not enough. And then like in this book, what I'm trying to show is like even if Democrats did everything they say they're going to do, and we get this neoliberal Democratic Party utopia, it's not nearly enough to what like we need to be doing to have a sustainable society and have social justice in the world. So
yeah, I appreciate the maps a lot because I feel like I associate the maps, like seeing maps on whether and papers or just like the beginning of a book. I associate it so much with like fantasy novels more so than, and this is like it's speculative, but it's also like very grounded, right? It's like, because you mentioned like it takes place in Houston, and you mentioned all these places that do exist that we, we're like right behind Poison Girl, which is like the bar that's mentioned on like page 1 probably.
Yeah, it's the second chapter. Yeah,
right. So I don't know, like having this map in this context of a novel, I feel like is something fresh that I kind of like appreciate a lot, and I like that kind of approach in general, to like rather than just like stick to like the tropes, like alright, this is a fancy novel, this is what they do in a fancy novel, so let's do this, let's do that, like just like play it by the book sort of thing, like be like, well, this is what they do in these books. What if we take it and do it here, and like just twist things a little bit? I kind of appreciate that approach to making things in general, anything, right? Whether it's a book or something else.
I think it's really good too for speculative fiction to be grounded in a specific place in the real world. Otherwise, it just like so much of like science fiction is like, I don't know. Well, I don't want to throw other things under the bus, but like a generic sci-fi. There's like a generic sci-fi world that we all think of, right? There's a generic dystopian world that we all think of. So whether you're really rooted in like Cairo or Houston, like these are cities that have like uniqueness. And so including, even if you're writing science fiction or whatever, including some of these elements that are here in the place where we live and being rooted in that right now makes it like so much more specific and I think just more powerful and, real.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I feel like I probably chickened out on that front.
Really?
Maybe.
I actually think there were elements of like, it didn't feel like someone born and raised in the U.S. in the suburb wrote it. I mean, like there was like, plenty of like
just a natural background.
Yeah.
Me writing.
Yeah.
Right.
I think in the Curse of I, God, I love that really detailed one landscape of the Menil collection. It's like that took some time.
Yeah, because that
yeah.
I cheated. I just used.
Okay.
But like that's like grounding it for sure.
Yeah, and like seeing, and then like you're walking. So at one point, he's visiting this museum that's like a free, like really cool museum here in Houston.
Called
the Menil Collection. And like walking through the Egypt wing and then out on the grounds, there's like the sculpture outside. I've been there so many times, I have memories there with my kids. You were saying, Laura, even we were just chatting a little bit beforehand about how like reading something about your city changes the way you experience your city. And then also, like, if you've experienced a city and then you read about it, that changes your reading of it. So I think that conversation is really cool.
You never see it in comics. You never see the real collection. You never see like the little part.
Yeah, no. No, that was very cool. It's like this feeling of recognition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if I could ask a little bit more on that front, both about the presence of Houston or the setting of Houston in the novel. I know that, as you said, there are landmarks that are present in the novel, including Poison Girl, the bar. There's recognizable flora and fauna that show up, and it really does kind of provide a sense of a specific location, even as there's also this kind of nostalgia or almost a yearning for what sort of in this alternate timeline, what could have been different, and that provokes us to think also about the ways that the city has erased and changed the landscape, and the peoples that have been indigenous to this place and that continue to be. And so I wonder if you could, if you've thought about if there's something about Houston in particular. I mean, just beyond the fact that this is where you live, the Gulf Coast, but is there something about this place, geographically, socially, climatologically, that you think makes it a great setting for this type of not only like climate, speculative fiction, but a narrative about social justice and activism?
So many things about Houston make it great for that. I think one thing is, like, I think that artists, and one of the reasons, like, I was putting together that art package 3 years ago about people on the Gulf Coast doing art around climate change, is because a lot of us are, because I think, at least for U.S. writers, we were being impacted by the like direct effects of climate change much earlier than other parts of the country, which have since started feeling it in the last couple of years. But since Hurricane Ike and Hurricane Harvey, those were like big wake-up call, and of course Katrina too, for so many amazing artists working in Louisiana. Big wake-up calls for this region. So I think we were like kind of ahead of, there was a lot of climate art being created down here. I think so much about the confluence of, like, this land is so incredibly important to the ecosystem of the entire Americas, North and South America, because this was like the estuaries along the Gulf Coast. This is supposed to be a coastal prairie. You're supposed to have all these different rambling bayous that flood and shrink, and then it's like, one, it's like a nursery for the entire Gulf of Mexico, and two, it was like a stopping off point for all the migratory birds going from North to South America. So it's this place of confluence of all these different ecosystems. And it was incredibly rich and fertile with like the people, the Karankawa and the Atacapa Ishak that lived here were just like, there was so much seafood. There was so much available food here for the indigenous peoples. And now it's still a place of confluence, but less than like 0.01% of that ecosystem still exists. It's one of the most almost extinct like ecosystems in the world. It's been just like completely paved over, and then now we have like the largest petrochemical infrastructure anywhere in the continent here in Houston. So the amount that this land has been transformed is horrifying. It's really horrifying. And then it's also, but it's like still this like confluence point, because it's also like the most diverse city in America. I mean, there people argue, or in the US, sorry. People argue about that, but it's by some metrics the most diverse city in the US, and that creates, an incredible vitality, I think, to our society. But yeah, those are things I think about when it comes to Houston. I don't know, what do you think about Houston? Because you.
So I mean, how long have you lived in Houston?
I was here 15 years. Yeah.
So I've only been here for 4 years.
Yeah.
So I, by definition, I don't have like any like strong attachment to the place. It does. I mean, it does strike me as like.
You can also hate on it to me. This is a safe space.
Like,
I hate so many things about it.
I definitely hate on it less than a lot of other places I've lived in the U.S.
Yeah.
You know, like I definitely hate on it less than Denver or St. Louis. But it does strike me as like a very and I mean including like how disseminated like the original ecosystem. Like it's just built like a standard American city, like to the point where it's just like. I mean, it is kind of like so dumb. It's like a very dumb way to go about building a city. And then when you take like the actual ecosystem and the nature of the actual environment into consideration, it's like that even makes just so much of the decisions around how it's built infrastructure that even like more dumb. But the actual kind of quote unquote urban fabric of the place and the approach to like urban planning or whatever aside, it also I appreciate that it's a city that I feel like hasn't like necessarily figured out what it wants to be really, you know. I feel like a lot of I feel like a great many kind of American cities are like tend to be one track in many ways, you know. So like a city like LA is very much like Hollywood and.
You don't think we're just oil and gas?
I mean, yeah, but I mean, obviously, like every other person you run into is like, yeah, oil and gas industry, right? So I mean, there is that, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel as oil and gassy as like you know, Abu Dhabi or some other you know city in the Arabian Gulf that's like.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's something about the. It's not very overtly oil and gas in some weird way, right? It's sort of like the oil and gas industry is over there, where like
in my neighborhood.
In your neighborhood.
It's in my neighborhood. On the east.
Yeah, I don't know. There's still something about this because like. There are like all these art institutions. There's the oil and gas industry. There's the medical thing, which is like really big as well.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like everyone who comes here because I want to make it in the oil and gas industry, like they would be like people who go to New York.
It's a place people live. It's not a place people like go to visit ever.
Right.
I can't get any of my friends to come visit me. Like no one wants to come to Houston, you know, just like for fun.
Yeah. But but I like that something about that makes it feel like you can participate in making it anything.
I get that, yeah, I get that, and it's down to earth. I think people here are very like down to earth in a way, like don't have the pretensions of like a Denver or an LA or like Austin, which is like so up its own butt. I'm sorry, Austin people.
Well, Austin people aren't really Austin people anyway. Most of them are.
Yeah.
Houston people love to talk about Houston and like loving and hating Houston. I think I really do feel. I love what you said, Ganzeer, about the feeling kind of the potential for transformation that exists here in a way that might not be the case elsewhere. And I think that this kind of convergence of different groups and this kind of crossing of not only like ecologically but socially, it comes up so many times in the Free People's Village. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to read a little passage that where there's this kind of convergence and this sort of dynamic energy is really represented. So it's on page 183. It's been about in the middle of the book in the section called The Free People's Village. And it's a paragraph at the end of the page. The occupation was growing steadily. At the People's Muster on Wednesday, I counted 123 of us. Between working and being in the kitchen, I hadn't had time to meet many of the new members, but Lorenzo filled me in that the Brown Bloc had joined our cause, and the coalition of young Palestinians and Jews against apartheid had shown up in solidarity, as well as organizers from other historically Black neighborhoods, Third Ward Strong and the Coalition for Urban Justice. The urban gardeners and Food Not Bombs folks were donating produce and groceries, and there was a rumor that the Gulf Coast Indigenous Alliance was coming, with 2 vans of indigenous activists from Brownsville and Corpus Christi. So I wanted to ask how your experience, Sim, with activism as an activist, with the activists, various activists communities in Houston and beyond, informed how that experience informed the novel, the narrative of it, but also kind of how you see its power, both at the time of publication and now today. Obviously, the presence of the young Palestinians, the coalition of young Palestinians, it comes back at the end of the novel in a really powerful way. And I want to take this moment also as an opportunity for acknowledging that work being done right now.
Yeah, so I, my first experiences with activism in Houston were mainly with Occupy Houston in 2011, where we were trying to do an Arab Spring in the U.S. and nothing happened. But no, not nothing happened, because that's the whole theme of the book, right? Is that every revolutionary moment is planting the seeds for the next one. And then that was a moment of like such energy, and people were camping out outside of City Hall and going down there every day and making signs and doing creative actions and things. We did have an encampment here in Houston outside City Hall. It was much smaller than like Oakland and New York. And then there were just years of a lot of nothing. Really the Black Lives Matter movement here in Houston was active in 2013 for Ferguson, and there was kind of some big movement happening there, but nothing quite on that scale again until 2020, with the murder of George Floyd, who was from Houston, and had family here, so that was like an enormous amount of stuff was going on that summer. And it was like, and then seeing it get crushed by the police all over again, just as Occupy had been 10 years earlier, was really brought up a lot of stuff for me. It was very devastating. And then I shared this in the event on Monday, but so I was writing this book from this place of grief of like, how do you keep going? How do you keep trying when you gave everything to this cause, and there was this movement that promised some hope, and then you're living through the backlash. And in Texas, it's like every time we fought for something over the 15 years I've been here, all that happens is we engender a backlash from the state government that makes everything worse. So for example, we fought for this equal rights ordinance a few years ago. Hero tried to get it passed, and then it failed, and then Governor Abbott created a law saying no cities can have an equal rights ordinance. So Dallas and Austin had equal rights ordinances, but they were destroyed because we tried to have one too. So it was really just a disheartening time. And then it was actually over the course of 2021, as I was writing this book, there was a huge outbreak of Palestinian activism that summer, and that kind of inspired like the whole ending of the book. And I decided like, oh man, like I really want to give the Palestinians the mic at the end of this book and let them, I really just almost very word for word, like told about a real action that the PYM and the SJP here in Houston put on in the Galleria, where they took over the streets surrounding the Galleria and formed a ring around it. It was just a really cool action. So yeah. And that was the first part of your question, was how did working with those activisms inform the book? So just, yeah, being engaged over the last 10 years, all those different sort of groups show up here. What's the second part of the question? It's just like how it resonates with now.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the power of I guess of art in general, as a force, that goes along with activism, the relationship between the two. I mean, not that one cannot be a substitute for the other, but that each has a role to play. I know that both of you, in speaking, and in also Sim and I were talking about this a little bit yesterday too. The differences between kind of like the temporalities and timelines of working with visual art versus like literary arts, how like there's an immediacy to certain kinds of art and activism versus maybe a different timeline or time frame of other kinds of creative work, like book publishing, for example, which takes a long time for the end result. So balancing this kind of the long game with the immediate and the importance of action in the moment, alongside this kind of a larger project.
I was thinking about in your zine, in the first lie, the part you have an essay in there about a political cartoon, a satire from an Egyptian newspaper in 1880 something. And it's kind of like you're making an argument for like, this isn't revered in like a Picasso or a Jackson Pollock, because those institutions will put their stamp of approval on it. But this one satirical cartoonist who was like the first in Egypt, or in the Arab-speaking world even, to do political cartoons.
Quite possibly, or at least like the one we know of.
Yeah. Right. Anyways, he ended up living in exile, and it had this enormous impact.
And he was still publishing and had his paper. His paper was kind of a zine, but it was kind of like a newspaper-y kind of sort of a zine thing, but still just self-publishing it. And he still had it circulating in Cairo from Paris after having been exiled.
And it was terribly threatening to the British authorities there.
To the Egyptian ruler at the time, because the British had not yet.
Right. He was like saying, "Look, this is where the British are coming."
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, it was just incredibly threatening to those in power. Just these political cartoons were like really destabilizing. And it made me think about just like, because I was just watching today about it, there was that leaked audio of that Israeli official talking about like TikTok is like all these young people on TikTok
I didn't hear that.
Okay, so some Israeli official is talking about like TikTok is like such a huge problem because like all these teenagers are like Hamas propaganda is getting to them, and we have to deal with the TikTok problem. And it's like they're so threatened by this art that kids are making. Like I was thinking about it today, I was just like, TikTok, like some of these satires are like hilarious and political and on point.
Yeah, they're fantastic.
Like, yeah, people are making great art on TikTok, and like that's why like I'm supposed to be writing like I have another book I'm working on, like my next book. But it's been so hard because like we're in a moment where it's like there's an immediate need now, and you kind of have to pivot to that more immediate art, like stickers or cartoons or TikTok, or like what can we get out right now? Because the book's gonna take a few years to get published. I think books are super important, obviously, for like long-term conversations about how we change society and move things forward. But when there's a crisis going on, or like a genocide, then it's time to like maybe pivot to making more immediate things. Yeah.
It's a good point. I got
that from you. I got that from those.
The way I see it is like so I tend to I feel a little bit like something of a disillusioned activist, a little bit, after having been involved in so many things and all the efforts pretty much failing to some degree, the intended degree, really. So in a way, I do see value in. I'm reluctant to say more. It's like how quantifiable is the value, right? But I do see like immense value in books, and because it's this thing that survives beyond the immediate moment, and it's something that could be picked up at any moment in time and read and influence long after you're gone, hopefully, right?
Yeah.
And that's very powerful, because I do also like recognize and realize like most of my influences come from books, like reading books, and that's what has shaped, like that has shaped kind of the person I am more so than, news bits or whatever, like whatever immediate kind of thing like that you consume and very quickly, right? Having said that, I do see like value in like feeling that kind of the immediate the need for like that immediate kind of like injection of something, as long as it's like there is a need for it. There's like a vacuum that needs filling, right? Like if I get a sense that like a lot of people are already kind of saying what needs to be said in this exact moment in time, or doing this or doing that, then I feel like, all right, I'm good. I could just work on this book or whatever long-term thing.
Yeah.
Or if there's just like some particular thing in the stuff that's being said that isn't being said, then you're like thinking about, okay, how there's this thing that no one's really getting at, and like how can I get at that thing, and what's the best way to get at it?
Yeah.
As opposed to just like kind of just join the crowd necessarily.
Yeah.
That's my perspective.
No, I think that's yeah, I agree. And the main thing, honestly, I've had this huge explosion in following over the last few weeks, because I just like on October 7th, I was like, hey, read books about, I'm a Jewish author, please read books about Palestine, like before you like weigh in. And that was like a really powerful message that, I got 20 million views on Instagram, that video. So yeah, obviously books, read books. Read books about Palestine. And then if you have a little extra time, you just read this.
Well, yeah, and the work that you're doing, Sim, is one of education through books. I mean, through talking about books and encouraging people to read books.
And that to connect them, and that's how you prepare yourself to meet the moment too, right? Is like you've done the reading,
right?
You consume the long form, and not just read. I mean, we don't whatever documentaries, like longer term form art, and then
books are still better.
Books are the best. Yeah, but then you're ready to meet the moment because you've learned and absorbed all these like deep narratives. Yeah.
I think this is something that really comes through in the Free People's Village as well, because there's this kind of like a bibliography of social justice and racial justice that is embedded in the book, which on the one hand, it's there to kind of like provide this structure of, the coming of age novel, or not necessarily coming of age, but coming to consciousness, or this kind of Bildungsroman that Maddie goes through, but that it's also potentially pedagogically transformative resource for the reader. And I'm curious about how you think about the references in the book, and how Maddie encounters them as both as a student and as a teacher, because she's kind of occupies both of these roles at various moments. So I wanted to ask that, kind of frame this question, and also to bring in a question that Giselle, I hope I'm saying the name right, has asked, that is similar. So Giselle is working on a YA sci-fi novel, and is wondering if you have advice for balancing a narrative with teaching a lesson about sustainability. So I guess it's kind of a question about sort of like how do you weave this two together? What role can kind of the pedagogical and resources play? What do they play in Free People's Village, and how do you see it kind of in your current the work that you're doing on the ground?
I think just using the tools of fiction, so like scene and like, is this a good scene? Communicating ideas through dialogue rather than just like a narrative chunk of text. And then in dialogue, making sure sort of, well, what are the different characters' motivations here? What's going on in their heads? Really good advice for writers is like any good scene, any piece of dialogue, it's always it's a fight, a seduction, or what's the other one? Like, so there's a third thing.
There's a fight, a seduction.
A seduction is where, and it's not necessarily a sexual seduction, but like you're trying to convince someone of something else. Oh, or negotiation. That's the third one. Negotiation. So you're either trying to sell something to them, right? You're like trying to win them over, or you're negotiating, like you're both trying to get something out of it. You're both having a conflict.
Your point or something.
Yeah, or it's a fight. If it's not one of those things, the scene probably is going to fall flat. So then it's going to be a lecture or something.
I'm curious. Wait, but you're saying a scene is a fight or the dialogue is a fight?
The dialogue.
So what's the difference between? I have a question.
Okay.
The difference between dialogue that is categorized as a fight and dialogue that's categorized as a negotiation?
Sometimes it might be a little bit of both. Sometimes it might be a little bit of both. Yeah. So So anyway, so like thinking about that, and so having characters with different ideas, like kind of grappling it out, and trying to figure out. So a lot of the sort of pedagogy comes through the character of Gestus, who is just this like very well-read leftist.
He's the best.
He's awesome. He's my favorite. And some people have told me like, oh, I feel like, or not told me, but I've seen some reviews of people like, oh, this guy's like unrealistic, he's for those ideas. I've certainly known some big Gestuses though. Like,
I feel like he's the most realistic.
Yeah.
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 He's like the most realistic.
He's like your lefty friend who's read everything, and it's really intimidating. And he's so confident in his opinions and everything. So a lot of the learning that he does is either through negotiating with him or trying to impress him, and screwing up sometimes in that. So there's like that interpersonal tension that keeps a conversation that's very abstract and ideas heavy from, I guess, falling flat on the page.
I have another question for you, actually.
Oh, okay.
So I got the sense, I don't know if this is true or not,
yeah,
that so the novel starts off and it reads almost like a romance novel at first, and then it takes a turn. And I'm wondering if it was it the exact did the book change?
Yeah, no, it totally changed. I write A to B, I write like in chronological order.
Yeah.
I didn't see the romance coming at all.
Wait, what?
Like when I sat down to write it, I didn't know there was going to be a love story in it at all.
But you had the idea for the ending and the concept or not?
No, the ending came from going to the PYM march, which was like halfway through writing.
Mid-writing.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It was going to be a lot darker and a lot bleaker. Because it was like everything was going to get smashed. It was going to be like no hope for the future. It was just like grieving.
Did you actually write a dark one and then change it into a light?
It was more dark. My editor did one of the biggest notes my editor gave me to make it less dark again. But it was already like a more hopeful ending because, again, activism had already sort of started resurging after like the really violent police, killing and tear gas and everything in 2020. So it was like, oh yeah, well, things come back around. This will be about regrowth. And
why is it important to have a novel that addresses failure and grief in activism?
Yeah, that's just what, I think it is important. I think that was just what I was feeling. So I just write what I feel to kind of work through it. So, this is like my therapy. It actually, so writing the book helped me both deal with a lot of grief I was feeling, also some interpersonal grief. The book is dedicated to two friends who died within a year of each other the year before I wrote this book. So, I was just like kind of in a dark place and trying to write my way out of it. Feeling very helpless as an activist in Houston and Texas, as a leftist in the world. And so I was trying to write my way out of that. I have so little tolerance for like toxic positivity. Like it's absolutely just the worst to me. So
there's a lot of it in fiction.
There's a lot of it in fiction. There's very little writing about, at least among the books I've read and in the US, mass market books. There's very little writing about activism, and the writing that is out there, particularly by white people, is has such simplistic narratives and offers such easy answers that we all know don't work in the real world. I'm thinking of like the enormous wave of like dystopian fiction of the 2000s, from starting with the Hunger Games and then the zillion books that spawned. Violence is often the ending of the Hunger Games is assassinating the bad leader is gonna fix the world. Like that, an assassination is
the ending of actually like a lot of forms of fiction.
Yeah.
Like, okay, there's this one bad guy.
Kill the baddie.
Kill the bad guy.
Yeah. So I just wanted to write a book that was also a dystopia, also a sci-fi dystopia, but where shit was so much more complicated than that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I remember I was talking to an agent early on developing Solar Grid. Just like, not really. And it was just like maybe like the first chapter. I finished the first chapter only. Like, can we get the bad guy on like page 5 or something? I'm like, it's not that type of book.
I don't know how it ends. Have you finished it?
No.
No. You got one more left?
2.
2 more left. Do you know how it ends?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
There is no baddie that gets killed.
Yeah.
At the end. Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
I don't know. What are you working on now? I guess tell me about the new story, because I know you've got a story collection in the works, right?
Yeah, but like I'm not sure how much I'm allowed.
Oh, you want to talk about it?
Because there's no deal on the table yet necessarily.
Okay.
But I can say that it is. It's a collection of short, weird dystopian, speculative fiction kind of thought experiments. All like really disturbingly dark, actually, which is not the point. But it's like actually it's all quite funny, but dark funny.
Dark and funny is very good.
Funny, yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. Anyway, and they're all like kind of like sort of like these little stories that the point of them is to make you think like long after you're done reading the thing, each story, right, about a particular issue or a particular thing. Like, so obviously it's all about like the world we live in today, as most speculative fiction is.
Yeah.
Right? But there's a lot of speculative fiction.
Cool.
Yeah.
I have we have one more question that has come up in the Q&A, and it's a question about how to deal with online harassment. So especially when tweeting or reposting or promoting pro-Palestine content, being on the receiving end of spamming, just an overload of negative harassment. Of course, all harassment negative. So this is a question coming from someone who is an Egyptian and doing their PhD in Canada, and is kind of risking perhaps being even kicked out of their program because of what has happened to them. So advice. You have it.
In the US, there's a great organization called Palestine Legal, and I've had a few people reaching out to me as well, saying they're facing repercussions for speaking out on Palestine, and I don't know how to help them. But the people at Palestine Legal have helped me before. I don't know if they operate at all in Canada, though, if there's anything like that. So I don't know if that's helpful, but they might take a call from Canada, like if they have some expertise there. But they've been providing free legal advice to anyone who's like facing kind of legal ramifications. The online stuff is easier to answer because you can just like I found out on, it depends on the platform. I haven't been talking a lot on Twitter because, well, right now my following is the largest on Instagram and TikTok, so I feel like that's where I can make the biggest impact. On TikTok, I got stitched by this right-wing MAGA dude trying to sell I Stand With Israel t-shirts, and he stitched like 10 seconds of one of my videos, took it out of context, and sent all of his followers to like dogpile me. So I was getting all these MAGA people, and there was a point a few weeks ago where like I was like 1,000 comments in a day, like Zionist, like hate comments, like, and it was really, it was like, it was scary. It was really overwhelming. So I ended up, but what made it better was I just shut down stitching, duetting, and comments on TikTok for a few weeks. And then I just turned comments back on, but you can turn it on so you filter them. So I have to approve comments. And that I got 4 hate Zionist messages today. And it was like thousands 2 weeks ago. So one thing I would say is like, it will pass if you become the target of a dogpile campaign like that. I think, if you do just shut down and kind of wait it out, it'll pass. I didn't want to take down my channel or go private or remove those videos because so many people have told me how helpful they were. But just turning off all the comments on everything, like if people don't have that ability to get at you, they're gonna move on. I think it's also been really helped by like the number of people that have been speaking out, that like those of us who were maybe going really viral in the early weeks, there's so many people now making content about Palestine that it's more diffuse. For the in-person stuff, one thing I've been telling people, for the in-person stuff, can you band together, banding together with others is helpful. So it's like not just you at your college speaking out, but you have a group you can connect with, or other students doing it. I think that's a way to be a little bit safer. It's tough. It's tough case by case. In some cases, like if you're in a job where like absolutely if they find out I've been speaking out about Palestine, I will get fired, then you can just have just cultivate an online presence that's not in any way tied to your real life identity, and that way you can still be involved in activism that won't impact your job. If you are speaking out as yourself on the internet, there's always like a risk with that, but it can be more powerful. So, and then there's times where it's like you don't want to you want to shut down and just kind of wait for the hate to pass and ride it out. And then there's times where it might be a better idea to like escalate it, go to the press with it, like tell people, take the screenshot of the email where you're being threatened and put that up there, because that can get you more eyes on the situation and give you some protection. But it's case by case. Like I can't give you all the answers, but those are some things to think about, I guess. I'm really sorry that it's happening to anyone, though.
Thank you so much, Sim. And thank you, Ganzeer, for this wide-ranging conversation, but everything is connected. I want to encourage everyone to consider buying the book. If you'd like to buy the book from Basket Books and Art, you can do that on our website, basket-books.com. All of the books that we have, all the copies we have of Free People's Village are signed by Sim, and we do ship internationally. So you can just go to our website for the book, as well as the Solar Grid and the Cursive Eye, which are also available through our website, as well as through Ganzeer's website, I believe. Ganzeer, you can confirm that that's another source for purchasing, perhaps.
Sure.
Or see you at the Orange Show tomorrow for Zine Fest Houston.